All right, well, moving on to lecture 21.3, the ecology of protists. Our goal is to discuss distinguishing characteristics again of the domains and kingdoms of living organisms. I particularly like this far side. It says, how nature says, do not touch. Yeah, the crazy man. Anyhow, I'm not going to say anything. Objective 1 is describe the ecological significance of photosynthetic protists, describe how heterotrophic protists obtain food, and identify the symbiotic relationships that involve protists too. So let's think about it though. After a few days of rain, you notice a small spot of yellow slime at the base of a stand of tall grass. You mark its position, and a few days later you come back and it has grown and moved away from the mark. Is it an animal, a fungus, a strange plant? The correct answer is it's none of the above. It's a protist called a slime mold. So our first objective is to describe the ecological significance of photosynthetic protists. Organisms commonly called algae actually belong to many different groups. Some, like cyanobacteria, are prokaryotes. Some, like green algae, belong to the plant kingdom, and some are protists. Photosynthetic protists include many phytoplankton species and the red and brown algae as well as euglena and dinoflagellates. This is a red algae, the brown algae, and I say it again, euglenas and the dinoflagellates. These organisms share an autotrophic lifestyle, marked by the ability to use the energy from light to make a carbohydrate food source. Not all photosynthetic protists are closely related to plants. In fact, the red algae are the most closely related to plants. Many other photosynthetic protists, however, are more closely related to non-photosynthetic protists. In some cases, certain species within a group have lost the chloroplast. In other cases, endosymbiosis added a chloroplast to some species, but then not to their relatives. Photosynthetic protists play a major role ecologically in the roles on Earth. The position of photosynthetic protists at the base of the food chain makes much of the diversity of aquatic life possible. Photosynthetic protists make up a large portion of phytoplankton, the small, free-floating photosynthetic organisms found near the surface oceans and lakes. About half of the Earth's photosynthesis is carried out by phytoplankton. Phytoplankton provide a direct source of nourishment for organisms as diverse as shrimp and baleen whales. Phytoplankton are an indirect source of nourishment for humans. So when you eat tuna fish, you of course are eating the fish that fed on the smaller fish, that fed on the smaller fish, that fed on the photosynthetic protist, the food chain. Coral reefs, which are found in warm waters throughout the world, provide food and shelter to large numbers of fish and other organisms. Protist algae, known as zoothanella, provide most of the coral's energy needs by photosynthesis. By nourishing coral animals, these algae help maintain the equilibrium of the coral ecosystems. Coralline red algae also help to provide calcium carbonate to stabilizing growing coral reefs. To stabilize the growing coral reefs, I should say. The largest known protist is giant kelp, a brown algae that can grow more than 60 meters in length. Kelp forests provide shelter for many marine species. Kelp is also a source of food for sea urchins too. Many protists grow rapidly in regions where sewage is discharged, where they play a vital role in the recycling waste materials. When the amount of waste is excessive, however, populations of protists, like the euglena, can grow to enormous numbers and create an algae bloom, which can disrupt the ecosystem's homeostasis. An algae bloom in a pond or lake can deplete nutrients from the water, and the decomposition of the dead protist can rob water of its oxygen, causing fish and the invertebrates to die. Algae blooms of marine protists called dinoflagellates create also what is known as red tide. The buildup of toxins produced by these protists can poison fish and shellfish. So objective 1 is to describe the ecological significance of photosynthetic protists. So the position of the photosynthetic protists at the base of the food chain makes much of the diversity of aquatic life possible. Objective 2 is to describe how heterotrophic protists obtain food. Amoebas can capture and digest their food surrounding a cell or particle and then taking it inside themselves to form a food vacuole. This is an excellent picture here, by the way. A food vacuole is a small cavity in the cytoplasm that temporarily stores food. Once inside the cell, the material is digested and the nutrients are passed along to the rest of the cell. Indigestible waste materials remain inside the vacuole until the vacuole releases them outside the cell. Paramecium and other ciliates use their cilia to sweep food particles into their gullet, as you can see right here. Little hairs are used to sweep it into the gullet, which is an indentation in one side of the organism. The particles are trapped in the gullet and forced into food vacuoles that form at its base. The food vacuoles then pinch off into the cytoplasm and fuse with the lysosomes, which contain digestive enzymes. Waste materials are emptied into the environment when the food vacuole fuses with the region of the cell membrane called the anal pore. There you go, right there. A slime mold is a heterotrophic protist that thrives on decaying organic matter. Slime molds are found in places that are damp and rich in organic matter, like on the floor of a forest or a backyard compost pile, for example. Slime molds play key roles in recycling nutrients in the ecosystem. At one stage in their life cycle, slime molds exist as a collection of individual amoeba-like cells, as you can see right here. Eventually, these aggregate to form large structure known as plasmodium, which may continue to move. Plasmodium eventually develops sporangia, in which meiosis produces haploid spores to then continue the cycle. Some protists survive by absorbing molecules that other organisms have released in the environment. Water moles, for example, grow on dead or decaying plants and animals, absorbing food molecules through their cellulose cell walls and cell membranes. This dead goldfish is covered with a common water mold called Saprolegenia. Close enough. Objective 2 is to describe how heterotrophic protists obtain food. So some heterotrophic protists engulf and digest their food while others live by absorbing molecules from the environment. Our final objective for this lesson is to identify the symbiotic relationship that involves protists. Mutualism. Many protists are involved in mutualistic symbiosis in which they and their host both benefit. For example, red algae, as you can see there, maintain a mutualistic relationship with the animals of the coral reef, which could not survive with the protist help. Trichonympha is another example of mutualistic protist. Trichonympha is a flagellated protist that lives within the digestive system, as you can see right here, of termites, and makes it possible for the insects to digest the wood. Termites themselves do not have the enzymes to break down the cellulose in wood. Trichonympha and other organisms in the termite's gut manufacture an enzyme called cellulose that breaks the chemical bonds in cellulose, making it possible for the termites to digest the wood. Parasitic protists are responsible for some of the world's most deadly diseases, including several kinds of debilitating intestinal diseases, African sleeping sickness, and malaria. Waterborne protists are found in streams, lakes, and oceans. Water supplies contaminated by an animal or human feces can spread protist parasites, causing serious and sometimes deadly outbreaks of intestinal disease. The mammalian intestinal parasite Giardia lamblia, visualized here, right here, are using scanning electron microscope as a waterborne protist that causes severe diarrhea and digestive system problems. Even crystal clear streams may be contaminated with Giardia, which produces tough cysts that can be killed only by boiling water thoroughly or by adding iodine to the water. Amoebas, as you can see here, cause a disease known as amoebic dysentery. The amoebas live in the intestines, where they absorb food from the host. They also attack the wall of the intestines themselves, destroying parts of it and causing severe bleeding. Cryptosporidium is resistance to the chlorine compounds that we also often use to sanitize our drinking water, and therefore pose a special threat to public water systems. In 2008, an outbreak in Utah sickened more than 2,000 people. The flagellated protists, trypanosomes, cause African sleeping sickness. Trypanosomes are spread from person to person by the bite of the tsetse fly. Trypanosomes destroy blood cells and infect other tissues, including nerve cells. Severe damage to the nervous system cause some individuals to lose consciousness and lapse into a deep and sometimes fatal sleep. Control of the tsetse fly and the protist pathogens that it spreads is a major goal of the health workers in Africa. Another one, fun-loving little parasite, is malaria. Malaria is one of the world's most serious infectious diseases. Malaria is caused by Plasmodium, a spore-forming protist carried by the female mosquito. Plasmodium requires two hosts to complete its life cycle, the mosquito and the human. And here is how it happens. First, a female mosquito bites an human infected with malaria and picks up the Plasmodium gametes. The human gets infected with the Plasmodium gametes. The fertilization occurs in the mosquito's digestive tract, and the Plasmodium sporozoites develop. The infected mosquito bites another human, transmitting the sporozoites through its saliva to the human bloodstream. Inside the human body, the sporozoites infected liver cells develop into merozoites and then infect the red blood cells. Infected red blood cells burst, causing malaria symptoms in the human host. Some of the released merozoites form gametes, and you can imagine happens again, goes around the cycle. So objective 3 is to identify the symbiotic relationship that involves protists. Well, it's very varied. Many protists are involved in mutualistic symbiosis in which they and their host both benefit. Parasitic protists are responsible for some of the world's most deadly diseases, including several kinds of debilitating intestinal diseases like African sleeping sickness and malaria too. Many protists are involved in symbiotic relationships with other organisms. The symbiosis is a relationship in which two species live closely together. Many of these symbiotic relationships are mutualistic. Both organisms can benefit. However, some are parasitic relationships in which the protist benefits at the expense of the host. So our three objectives again are describe the ecological significance of photosynthetic protists, describe how heterotrophic protists obtain food, and identify the symbiotic relationships that involve protists. And yes, it still supports our goal of distinguishing characteristics of the domains and kingdoms of living organisms. And that is a blood cell that's been taken over by malaria. Anyhow, not a cute picture, but enjoy.